And it's great chatting with both of you about these movies. Like, they're just unbelievably well done movies. So it's been real pleasure hearing how you did it.
And they're both war films,
Yeah.
Yeah.
both World War One. So
Yeah.
it's you know, ours falls into World War II, but it's you know, that's how it starts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
I like your conclusion, like, you know, sometimes more is more, and then sometimes it's not. You know, that was really,
Yeah.
it's such a classic. Yeah.
You know, and to me, especially with music, is and when you have a lot of music, when music has, you know, 70-80% of the film, if it's played too loud, you become very aware of it, and all of a sudden becomes kind of boring, and also doesn't have any impact. You know, your emotion is kind of gone because you've checked out, and it becomes just kind of a background noise. So the precision of that, I mean, you know, really making sure that you're in that pocket, that correct pocket. It takes a lot of looking at it and going back and playing the whole film, as you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we had a bunch of conversations with Volker Bertelmann, our composer. He had done a couple of films with Edward before. I hadn't worked with him before, but it was really kind of encouraging because when we spoke about the, you know, the work, like the how do we deal with the music across the battle scenes and stuff like that. But it turned out he's actually someone he doesn't want to add stuff where already one department is doing all the work. You know, it doesn't make sense often when everyone is doing the same thing in the same direction at the same time. So
Right.
that was really great to see these first layouts that he sent, and then to learn that it's quite a transparent kind of music, and obviously these iconic like 3 notes that became the, you know, the theme, the main theme, were just so kind of, oh my God, wow, this is, you know, just 3 tones, but they carry so much in them. Yeah, I mean, music-wise, like music, we never had a kind of a music versus effects, never that kind of situation. Was always kind of blending it together. That was really awesome. Like the collaboration generally on that film was great.
Yeah.
And that's similar with this, where it was very much the music's not going anywhere. So Scott really had to make sure that his design and the sounds that he chose and the frequencies of what those sounds are doing can work with it. Because without those sounds, it's not like you can just say, "Oh, there's music. Let's take the sound out." I mean, sure you could, right? Sure you could, but why would you? You have to work hard. You have to get what is appropriate for the film first, and then for the music second, when they live hand in hand. And it's not as easy as it seems. I mean, the little noises. In fact, Scott came to my house. I have a large workshop at home. I'm a big maker, so I have mills and lathes and CNCs and all that stuff. And Scott came by the end of 2021, and with a whole bunch of different types of wood. Beautiful wood too. I'm not talking about pine stuff at Home Depot. I'm talking about beautiful wood that he actually got from Paul Reed Smith guitars. And he asked me to cut them in different lengths for him. And then he would click them together to see what kind of click they had, if it was harsh or warm or mellow or vibrant or whatever the case was. And so he would actually go through clicking different types of woods together, so he knew what would work best for that scene. And then on top of that, use different types of sounds, you know, for Pinocchio. So there was always a choice. In a similar manner that of the way Alexander scores, where he's not always tying your hand. Of course, I had everything split completely, but he's not ever really tying your hands. He gives you options, you know, which I just very lucky.
You guys, you mentioned, John, there about how you're both doing World War movies and World War One movies, which are, like, you know, pretty unique, I would say, at least in some capacity, because I think we've seen a lot of movies about World War II. Do you, like, how much are you kind of ignoring what has been done previously in, like, war movies, like, to make sure you're not, like, replicating those sounds, I guess? Or you know, Frank, for you, I mean, like, how did you kind of approach that? And John, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear, like, how you thought
I
about that too.
yeah, I was kind of, when I started, I thought about, you should watch the old versions, the old adaptations from 1930 and the 80s version as well, as part of the research. But in the end, I decided not to, because I thought, like, I might be, you know, I really want to start with a white canvas. I mean, blank canvas. Obviously, I've seen, you know, Private Ryan and all these iconic war films and stuff like that. But it's a long time ago. I didn't want to revisit them as prep for this film, because I thought let's try and do our own version of this, and let's let it, to a certain degree. Of course, there's always like the learned kind of experience of war from films, because I haven't been to a war ever in my life, and I hope I never have to. So there's no firsthand experience for myself. So everything learned from wars and how it sounds and what happens there is actually from movies or from documentaries and whatnot. So, and I just wanted to leave that in the back of my head as something I had seen years back, but I didn't want to purposely revisit all that and then kind of have it so fresh in my head that would make me, oh, they did it this way, that was so great, let's try that also, etc. And all these thoughts that might pop up. So I wanted to avoid that. So I didn't even read the actual novel, even though I had it, and I read it in school, and it's such an iconic kind of, everyone knows this book kind of thing. But I really started from scratch, kind of just using my fairly kind of way back memories of these things. So yeah.
And John, how about you? Obviously it's a little different, but like you're saying, like there's a part, I mean, like the begins in World War I, and obviously you have threaded throughout is obviously the war. So yeah.
Yeah, I can't speak for Scott and what he went with, but as far as, because these were kind of snippets of the war, the film existed during the two wars, but it was all about the emotional value. So in other words, it was whatever translates best. And also remember, there's a difference between realism and film realism. Right. And this is always it's an interesting conversation, because people always say, oh, we're going to make it real, well, what does that mean? What does that real mean? What are you talking about? How you grew up in a theater, or what you've experienced in real life, which is kind of what Frank was talking about. And it's always of how we grew up watching theaters and listening to, even television shows or podcast or whatever the case is. It's what we experience from other forms of media. And so then in this case, it's finding what works best emotionally, always. I don't know how accurate these planes are. Well, knowing Scott, he probably went and got some 1914 plane and flew it and recorded at the same time. But the bomb doors opening, the bomb falling, that critical moment of the film. It really is what's emotionally, what's the texture that has to exist to really get you committed to what's happening, emotionally. It's whatever he used was perfect.
Right. You guys both are movies here that are theatrical movies that were also out on Netflix, so seen by a large amount of people, right? Like so many people, and we've experienced, like we're saying here, like a lot of movies people just have watched at home throughout history. But you're also mixing and like making these movies sound great for the theater. I guess, do you think about like how people are going to watch them both now and then like in the future when you're working on the films, or how do you kind of approach that? I guess, John, you want to start, and then maybe we can go to Frank too.
That is such a great question. In fact, there's still films that only ask for 5:1. Still, and sometimes it's very appropriate. Sometimes mono is very appropriate. But yes, you always are thinking about, first of all, the end user. So if you're mixing theatrically and then you do a separate mix for home, how's that going to translate? You definitely, where everybody's doing that now. So for the most part, I should say that Frankie and myself, we work at Universal on the Hitchcock Theater. It's a 92-foot theater. It's a large theater. That's where we are based at 100% of the time. So we don't bounce around. So we know our stage, we know how it translates. And basically up until recently, we've never really done, in fact, we still haven't done an actual streaming show. So they've all been theatrical releases. So we've always done theatrical mixes. And then on the back end have done a near field sort of rebalance, and to make sure that we hit the numbers for who's ever, streaming the show. But yes, you are constantly thinking about it. We always mix in Atmos, regardless of what they want on the back end. We always mix in Atmos. And how much Atmos we use, how much of the overheads, how much of the wides we use. Yes, we'll we'll definitely, that'll be in the back of our head saying, okay, if we make this too different, it's not going to work. So we do have to do a 5-1 pass so the director can hear how it's going to be in the theater or streaming or whatever the case is. But yes, that's it's something we constantly think of, and that's not new. That's always been that way. I've been mixing for 35 years, re-recording mixing for 35 years, and mono. You always had to be aware of mono in the beginning. So you can mix stereo, but okay, and we're in LTRT. Is this going to fold down correctly to mono? And if you don't watch that, then a lot of your sounds that are going to surrounds or whatever will disappear. If you go to mono, you won't hear, it's the exact same story. It's just changed, it's
Right.
new.
Yeah, always evolving, right, with the technology. But is this the same? Frank, how about you? Is that you have a similar
Yeah.
experience, I guess? Yeah.
Pretty much the same. I mean, on All Quiet, since this was a Netflix thing from the start, and but we treated it as a theatrical film. When we worked on it in the editorial and then the mix, it was always, we mixed for theatrical release the whole time, and then did the dynamic reduction for the home theater version and stuff like that. But I mean, like you said, in the old days was much harder in a way to make sure everything's compatible with, like, Atmos makes it so much easier. It just scales down so much more, like, seamlessly. I mean, there you have to definitely listen to stuff in this process, but like our film, like the theatrical version is really, really dynamic. Like the dynamic range, we really try to go to the whatever is possible in the theater, especially in the lows, and that to avoid the home theater user audience doesn't have everything, lose everything. Like the opening landscape shot has a very, very tiny environmental background sound in there, so just to make sure that it's not completely lost and it doesn't sound like there's just nothing, like technical silence in there. That's kind of the process. You push the quieter parts up, so that's the main process now. Make sure nothing falls down in a weird way. But otherwise it was a theatrical film for us all the whole time. Like, yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess as a viewer, I'm thinking about how I watch like so many classics in my like Magnavox with like one speaker on the side versus now, where at least I have a surround capability. I guess it's like still a better experience at home than it was even when I was as a kid. So the sound is automatically gonna sound better as well. It's for both of you guys, like when you're watching stuff and even working on stuff. This is a very broad question, but what makes for good sound in a movie for you guys? Like, how do you think about that? Like, is there a good, like, how do you, like, is it like we're saying here, it sounds like a lot of the subtleties and like nuances, but I mean, do you think that's what it is? Or like, how do you kind of approach like what a good sounding movie would be, I guess? John, how about you?
I'll just go for the kind of most obvious, simple answer. It's clarity. I don't want to have to guess what I'm supposed to be focused on. So, in fact, it kind of goes back to, let's say the early 1990s, and where you have a strong producer, and was easy with producers. When there's dialogue, I want to hear the dialogue. I want to know what they're saying. I don't want to have to strain. And there's a real value to that. When there's melody of music, I want to hear the melody. Every note of that melody is important because it's pulling me emotionally, or it's designed to pull me emotionally. And then it be supported. When you have the conflict of all the different sounds in the music and the dialogue, and you're not exactly, you kind of get lost. It becomes blurry. It's like I have, bad lenses or something. It's the same with sound. Clarity, regardless of what it is very important. There's several films that we decided, okay, a spotlight. Where's the spotlight got to go? Where's the spotlight? And then if you kind of learn to think about it in that sense, it becomes simple, but in a way, it's always going to be difficult because it's like, well, here I am, my 30th pass on this line. It's clear as a bell. Well, now you go back at 2 weeks later, you play it. It's like, I have no idea what they said. I couldn't tell you. So it's a constant battle, for clarity, not just dialogue, but everything. Effects also. Sometimes those subtleties, the subtle effects that you're talking about, Frank, are the most important thing at that moment. So if it's not subtle anymore, then it's lost its value, emotionally. So you really have to work. There's a lot of hard work that goes into the smallest of the details.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, we definitely took a little bit of freedom in terms of like blurring the lines there in terms in the scenes where we actually wanted confusion, or use that as a tool to create what's going on, to create this moment of becoming overwhelmed in terms of so much stuff going on that you're pretty much, to use that as a tool to be in Paul's shoes, basically. And then once things change, to fall back to making clear, okay, this is the important thing, this is the direction for the audience, this is something you should focus on, and stuff like that. For instance, in the first battle scene, where the Heinrich, the first soldier in the opening battle, hides behind this tree stump and he's being shot at, and he's the terror and the fear to tell that story. There's a sound of just microphones being dragged through mud and dirt, just kind of more or less sound mistakes, and those circle around the theater in a circle around. And it's one of the ideas to kind of everything blurs out and becomes muffled in a way, like a hearing loss moment. But then there's this kind of metaphorical sound of soil that this poor soldier is trying to avoid being turned into, basically. So stuff like that is not consciously, we're not pointing the finger at it. I believe now that I'd said it, some people might notice it, but it's also clarity in terms of what you, like you said, the where do you want the focus to be? So you add confusion overwhelm people, but then at the same time not make it distracting and completely obvious, that hello, here's the effects playing in the surrounds and all that stuff. So it should still feel consistent, and people should be able to follow the red line of the story in that moment, of course.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. I mean, the both of your work here in these movies is just incredible. We do have to wrap up. From All Quiet on the Western Front, supervising sound editor Frank Kruse, and from Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, Jon Taylor. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.